Buffalo Startup Week, billion-dollar startups in Western New York. Are they possible? You know, not only are they possible, but we've done two that we've sold for over $1 billion, one for 1.1 and one for 2.3. And we believe we're well on our way to our third. So I'm going to give you some background on really where I've come from. I'm a Buffalo guy, first of all. I was born in town of Tonawanda, spent the first 31 years of my life in Buffalo. Part of that, I was down here in Rochester at the University of Rochester, where I met my wife. I do have a BS in biochemistry and neuroscience, as Madonna said, which helps because I actually use chemistry in my business today, every day. But right, you know, as I was in school, my wife and I fell in love at the U of R, and even she's a Buffalo girl too. And, but we met here in Rochester, strangely, and, wanted to get married right out of college. So we did about, 2 years after college. And, so we went back to Buffalo, and, I worked in telecom because, a neuroscience degree doesn't do you a whole lot unless you want to work for the pharmaceutical industry, which I did not. So I ended up working in telecom, and then became a bank vice president because I saved a guy in a snowstorm off the thruway, and he ended up lining up a bunch of interviews for me, and I ended up becoming a vice president at Gold Dome for about 4 years, downtown Buffalo. And then strangely, I ended up becoming a director of admissions at Bryant and Stratton, and then became a college president. I was a college president in Cleveland for an engineering school, 4-year school, and that went really well. And then I was asked to come back into telecom in Rochester, where they asked me to come in and run sales for the U.S. because a number of folks had worked with me in the past there and knew I had a sales management, and I was very background. I was very process oriented, which I am. It helps having a science background because I think in science and engineering terms, in terms of how I approach all aspects of business, really, I'd have to say. So really, I think process around sales. I kid my boss, who's an MIT engineer, that the differences between sales and engineering are shockingly few if you do sales right. So while we were at ACC Telecom, which was based here in Rochester, and we had offices in Buffalo too, I began working with some outside entities as the company had gone through a CEO change, and we were public. We were about 600 million in sales, roughly globally, most of it in the US under my groups, and the profit was in the US, though we were in Canada and in the UK and Germany as well. And so I reached out to two companies. One was Teleport, based down in Manhattan and Queens, actually. Then I was working with another company, and they got into a bidding war over acquiring us. So we were public already. They acquired the company for ACC for a little over 1.1 billion, $52 a share roughly, as I recall, back in 1998, and actually ended 1997, beginning in 1998. And so a number of us were sitting there at ACC Telecom, still employed by AT&T, and deciding what we wanted to do next with our lives. And we knew a lot about process, and also knew that there were a lot of terrible things that we were living with, poor accounting that didn't allow us to really judge the profitability of individual accounts, some legacy people issues that we had really, as a company, never addressed. And so we decided we wanted to start with a clean slate, a whiteboard. And so we went out and we raised over initially just $5 million to launch a telecom company in Rochester. It was an interesting time. We got into a really challenging situation with and you can look back on this, it's probably still on Google from 1998, hard to say if it still is, but we got into a really challenging situation where AT&T was not happy that we left, even though they had extinguished our non-competes. was not a very favorable situation. We weren't too happy about it because they had extinguished our non-competes, didn't want to pay us any kind of parachute exit. They did not, but they extinguished the non-competes so we could go off and compete. I don't think they really ever believed we would or could, but we did. And so we launched a new telecom company. We eventually signed some wonderful agreements with AT&T. They became good friends again. And we bought a lot of services from AT&T, but it was a challenging way to start a company when AT&T is, when you're nothing, a $5 million company with, a bunch of employees joining us, and AT&T's unhappy with you. It was a very challenging time, but we grew that company from 3 employees. I was one of the 3 founders, to over 5,000 employees and $2.3 billion, and based here in Rochester, New York, in the telecom arena. Eventually acquired a Buffalo company too, a power company, an energy company. So, and made tons of mistakes along the way. A lot of them were hiring mistakes, frankly. So one of the biggest challenges when you're growing from 3 employees to even 50 employees, but certainly when you're trying to grow to thousands of employees, you rely on really what you know. And, companies that are new and early stage don't have a legacy HR group,
after our discussion in
legacy training. They don't really have any of that. So, and we didn't. And so we had to learn the hard way. The good news is, I think the thing we were probably best at was listening to our people. And perhaps the thing we were best at was communicating with our employees, communicating with our customers, shaking a lot of hands and really working arm in arm with our people, and not carrying big egos around. We listened a lot and made a lot of mistakes, but when we'd make mistakes, we'd actually make changes. And as a result, we built a really profitable company that was extremely employee-centric and extremely customer-centric. And the customers loved it. If you talk to people who were Paytech customers around Buffalo, we had the lowest attrition rate, best retention rate for customers in the business. And that's how we sold the company for $2.3 billion as a public entity at Paytech. And so our CEO and I, good friends, and he's an MIT engineer at the time, same guy. So it's like the Who song, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And we started talking. We were highly successful. We had a multi-billion-dollar company already while we were there at Paytech. And he said to me, what do you want to do next? I said, well, we've learned a lot. We've made so many mistakes, and we've, learned how to build, but we've learned all these process issues around how to build a large organization and grow it into profitability world. And he agreed 100%. He said, we need to get into the energy business. So he began introducing me to people at MIT. And then I was fortunate enough to find an inventor at RIT here in Rochester. And this inventor was more in line with my skill set, which was chemistry. And we met a number of solar folks and so forth at MIT, but chemistry was much more in line with my expertise. So he was one sole founder who had no employees and no capital. And so he said, why don't you come in as a co-founder and help me start this company? Sweetwater, he had already named it. And I said, looked at the story. We were focused on biomass, breaking down biomass and competing against petroleum. And our focus was really ethanol. So a big, ridiculous goal in some ways. You're competing with petroleum, and we'll talk about it at some length in terms of where we are today, 11 years later. So John Gavigan has become a good friend out of Buffalo, and John, who used to run 43 North, as you may know, is now an Endeavor Global employee, and he is one of the leaders for Endeavor Global in Western New York. And John and I met in Buffalo through Madonna, who you saw earlier, and I'm sure all of you know quite well. And Madonna graciously introduced us a couple of years ago, and John knew the story of Sweetwater already and where we were at, and thought that it might make good sense for Sweetwater to become an Endeavor global company. So it's a very rigorous process, many months it required of deep due diligence and hard work. And we went through the global international selection panel and were selected. So we're an Endeavor global company, Endeavor global entrepreneurs. John Gavigan and Alan Rosenhock are working with us extensively. They're great guys, now good friends. And I can't say enough about John Gavigan, and that guy's just amazing. And then MIT decided to name us as one of their top startup companies for this coming year. So we're a top 25 MIT company. And MIT, so John and his team at Endeavor have been introducing us to global partners for collaboration and product development. And I'll talk about why that's been so important. And the MIT group has been introducing us around the world, actually, which has been great. I'm still married to my college sweetheart from Buffalo, who I met at the U of R, and she's extraordinary, and I'm a lucky guy. So I'm going to actually jump to a different slide deck for a second, if I may.
Yep, go.
And again, if you've got questions, go ahead and please send them on into Madonna. Well, I tried to share screen here. Kanishka, can you see that all right?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. So we're a disruptive technology at Sweetwater, and that's very different from the way it really worked with Paytech, which in many ways, Paytech was the same story. It was a spin out in some ways, like law firms and other companies. You know, when law firms break apart, usually it's contentious, as it just was famously in Buffalo. I won't name names, but and people leave with clients oftentimes in those scenarios. When we launched Paytech, we could not leave with clients because we were in the challenge with AT&T. So we didn't at all. We were used to already going out and hunting for new customers anyway, so we did exactly that. But we effectively had the same business model. So we weren't reinventing anything, except our engineers were really smart, and so they did reinvent some things. They actually combined local and long distance telephony and internet all on the same platform, which nobody had really ever done, including AT&T at the time. And so that was new, but it wasn't a disruptive technology by any means. It was, and we quickly got it to high revenues. You know, we were a $100 million company within 2 years. We were almost a $300 million company in 3 years. So that was just ridiculous growth. We knew how to run that type of operation because that's what we've been doing. So that wasn't rocket science for us. But most disruptive technologies are something like rocket science. So just giving you a few, oil refining was invented by Samuel Keir in 1850, and this guy Edwin Drake really got into drilling. Folks up in Canada did some. Microchips, Bell Labs, 1947, very disruptive, of course. Refrigeration at DuPont in 1930. Television, a name you probably don't know because I didn't know it until I looked it up. Philo Farnsworth, what a great name that is. That sounds like the name of a band. In 1934. Jet engines, Pan Am, 1958. Google, Tesla, and of course the internet or disruptive technologies, arguably for Tesla, I think it is. And sustainable and economical biomass refining hasn't been done. So I'm going to talk a bit about Sweetwater and give you some background on Sweetwater. Sweetwater Energy is a platform company. We're based up here in Rochester. As Madonna said, we're at Eastman Business Park, the former Kodak Park. Physically, that's where our headquarters is here in Rochester, and our demonstration facility is here in Rochester. We have a commercial scale facility that's a $50 million plant that has been built by a licensee of ours in the Baltics, in Europe, in Estonia specifically. And that is in the process of going live now. We have a team actually in Estonia today and they were there as of June 4th, and came back just a few weeks back to renew their visas, and they're back again to finalize acceptance of our system, our technology, which is the heart of that particular biorefinery. And it works. So that's kind of the incredible milestone we've just achieved. So what is Sweetwater Energy? We've developed a patented technology that efficiently converts over 90% of a given renewable biomass into high value ingredients that go into products that we all use every day. Again, it's a platform technology because we're able to create a lot of different products from it. So we process wood or crop residues. We've worked with both extensively. We're working primarily with wood over the last 3 years, although again, now we're working with crop residues and even some more exotic stuff. And we process that into 3 valuable product building block ingredients. The ingredients that we make from wood are specialty cellulose, microcrystalline, and nanofibrillated cellulose, or nanocellulose. You may have heard of it called that, at low cost and large scale. And until I got into this business, I didn't know what microcrystalline cellulose was or nanocellulose. There's a wiki on each one. If you want to fall asleep early this weekend, look at the wiki on microcrystalline cellulose or the separate wiki on nanocellulose. They're fascinating products and very advanced materials. And we'll talk about why ours is cheaper and better in a larger scale. Unique, clean, non-sulfonated lignin. It's a biopolymer. And I'm not going to go into the chemistry, but I'll tell you the products that we're working with partners to make from this lignin. And then highly fermentable sugars, 6 carbon sugars and 5 carbon sugars. So 6 carbon sugars are glucose, the ones we eat. Can actually buy 5 carbon sugars through Amazon or at Wegmans even. They taste a lot like regular sugars, almost exactly, and it's not like a sugar replacement. It's an actual sugar. Tastes quite good, but it doesn't have the same kind of glycemic index as glucose, so it's good for if you're diabetic or if you're just trying to watch your weight. So what is the process and how does it work? This is a kind of a cutaway view of what Sweetwater's technology looks like. It's based on a platform called twin screw extrusion. And we're all using extruded products every day. Extruders are all over the world in lots of different industries. Plastics, all PVC pipe is extruded. Virtually all pipe is extruded. So metal pipes are extruded too. Aluminum gutters are extruded. You all know about extrusion because spaghetti is extruded. So, and if you've ever seen your mom or grandmother making ground beef at home, that's an extruder. So it's basically a screw turning and pushing something through a die at the end. And that's an extruder. Frito-Lay has over 300 extruders deployed around the world that run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's how they make Cheetos, and corn puffs are extruded. So lots of different food products, plastics, metals, again, well understood technology, and we're using it in a very different way. Our extrusion is really a chemical reactor. So a giant chemical reactor. We take wood. In this case, we also, as I said, take crop residues that we typically pelletize to make them more dense, but wood chips and this picture, this animation, they go into a feed zone into our extruder, which is, again, the extruder is just a barrel at commercial scale. It's small, relatively small, 14 feet long, about 1 foot in diameter. The screw elements, there are 2 screws inside it that look like giant drill bits. Each of them are about 3 inches in diameter, 88 millimeters. And they co-rotate. They turn at the same time in the same direction. And they're grinding up that wood and creating a biomass plug in the orange section here that you see, orangish red section. That's we create this biomass plug in this grinding zone and downsize the wood. So it's basically getting ground up. At that point, the biomass plug allows us to create a reaction zone after that, where we're introducing steam to introduce heat, and then a very dilute amount of sulfuric acid to catalyze the reaction, for those of you who think back to your high school chemistry, and to start the reaction. And in just 20 seconds, the wood goes from the wood on the left to something that looks exactly like chocolate pudding. In fact, that's our stuff, our pre-treated material on the right there. It looks like chocolate mousse or chocolate pudding. And the average particles, the mean particle size in that pudding is about 38 microns. So very small, uniform particles. And okay, big deal. Why is that interesting? It is, because it's never been done before that quickly and that thoroughly, and also that gently on a platform that allows you to scale to as large as you want to build it. So I guess it's a small scale to start, which is cool. So that means this can go into Bermuda, or when not Bermuda, it's a bad example. Haiti would be a good example. Hawaii is an excellent example. Africa, where, you know, putting up $20 million for a project versus say a $400 million plant or a $500 million plant. Large companies in Iowa, large household name companies, spent almost $500 million on similar technologies that didn't work because they didn't have this pretreatment technology. And so they were trying to do it with scale, which of course would prevent you from going into a country in Africa that typically at the countries we're talking to there, the budgets just aren't that sizable for a new technology. But $20 million, sure, if provided it works, which ours does. So what is wood? You know, what's it made of, and why is this cool? We're getting, as I said in the early part of this part of the presentation, 90% of the wood or crop residue, we're actually getting into value markets. So the first thing we do is we get the wheat, the 5 carbon sugars, and just about 20% of the cellulose broken down right away in that 20 seconds. So that chocolate mousse, we go through a liquid solid separation as soon as we get that chocolate mousse, and we can ferment that immediately into ethanol, not corn ethanol, wood-based ethanol. We also are working with folks who've been successfully fermenting ours into industrial chemicals. So it's not just ethanol you can make. We have one company that we're working with in Europe that actually successfully makes hydrocarbons, drop-in hydrocarbons, not just ethanol. Ethanol is very easy for us to make, which is why I talk about it. So we kid about it sometimes. So you think vodka, or in this case, made from wood, woodka, and we make a pure vodka effectively. And so that's unusual. And, you know, ethanol actually right now, because of COVID, of course, is going for a serious premium. So what we've got left after we do a liquid solid separation of that chocolate mousse, we've got a matrix remaining of lignin, this biopolymer. The fiber that helps a tree stand up is what lignin is, or grass, same stuff. And as you can tell, it's a tree is about 95% comprised of this stuff. It's got a few other things in there, and so is grass. So is wheat straw, corn stover. It's all basically, you know, carbon based, as you can imagine. So lignin, ours is unique. The pulp and paper industry creates this biopolymer today, but it's really nasty. It typically is bound, in their case, with the heavy sulfur, because they use extreme sulfuric acid in most paper processes today. We don't. So ours is not bound with sulfur, and as a result, you can use it to make polyurethane foams, paints, coatings, and we've got partners doing all of that. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then perhaps the most exciting stuff we're making are these microcrystalline cellulose that I suggested you take a look at the wiki. You've actually eaten microcrystalline cellulose this week. If you had a vitamin, a supplement, an Advil, it's actually listed as the first ingredient on the side of an Advil bottle. It's also in Kraft Parmesan cheese. It's in Beyond Burgers. It's in a lot of different things. And that's from a food standpoint, but microcrystalline cellulose has other properties that are pretty incredible in terms of lightweighting cement, lightweighting packaging to make it more sustainable and replace petroleum ingredients. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Uniquely, we also have a low energy pathway to take our microcrystalline cellulose to the nano size particle. And microcrystalline cellulose, you know, I was describing this to you know, what is microcrystalline cellulose? It's really tiny particles of wood, really, at the end of the day. And then we have a low energy pathway to make them even tinier, get them down to the nanoscale. So a low energy pathway, we're using a simple technique that we're going to deploy at commercial scale to make nanofibrillated cellulose. So again, a separate wiki on nanocellulose, extraordinary stuff. When processed correctly, nanofibrillated cellulose, the type we make, can be up to 5 times the strength of steel at 1/2 the weight. So the Japanese government announced back in October, and if you Google on nanocellulose, Japanese government electric car, it's a very cool looking car with gull-wing doors. And they built the body panels primarily from nanofibrillated cellulose, apparently 95% from nanofibrillated cellulose, because it's 5 times the strength of steel at 1/2 the weight. And it's very, very expensive as it's made today by the pulp and paper industry. Ours is not. So we have a facility through a licensee. A licensee of ours has built this facility in a consortium of 9 companies in Estonia and the Baltics. That's it. We've been going through pre-treatment. We're at roughly 75 metric tons per day, which is our commercial scale. So those are dry tons. So we talk in science and engineering terms. And so it's about 50,000 green tons or tons as harvested wood per year. I have my environmental friends, and I'm an environmentalist too, are always asking like, well, aren't you deforesting or chopping down trees in order to do this work? And the answer is, yeah, from plantations where we're and the companies we're working with. I mean, that's a problem in Brazil and in the Amazon where they're clearing grazing land for cattle. And that's a huge problem, but it's not a problem when you're talking in New York State and Minnesota and Estonia, where people go out of business virtually instantly if they deforested and didn't replant. The good news is we can work with fast-growing trees, or nobody's cutting down old forests ever. Efficient, cost-effective, and biorefining is now a reality at commercial scale with this technology. So our partner, they're called Granule Biotech. They're the 2nd largest wood pellet company in the world, and they wanted to move up kind of the value chain with us. And they've led a 9-member consortium of companies that are using our building block ingredients to make everything from hydrocarbons to polyurethane foams for insulation, and really a lot of petroleum replacement products for global markets. And it works. So I'm going to talk why this is such a big deal. So we have the first technology that we believe is really a whole barrel technology. And you think about why the oil industry has been so successful, since 1850, when they figured out how to actually process oil and refine it. They had 170 years to make new products from it. And obviously during COVID, it dropped to negative pricing, but it's still cheap. And since fracking, it's become really cheap globally. And we expect it's going to remain there. We expect oil is going to remain there until there are carbon taxes and so forth, and who knows when and where that's going to happen. So sustainable biomass has never been able to compete on a price basis against petroleum in markets for fuels, chemicals, paints, coatings, plastics, all the stuff we get from petroleum, which the markets are countless, they really are. And the petroleum industry is the largest industry in the world at roughly $1 trillion. So who's going to displace petroleum? Who can actually come in and actually fight against petroleum without subsidies? And that's what we've got. Our sunburst process is the first to achieve economically competitive whole barrel pathway for sustainable biomass. Again, efficiently processing over 90% of a given biomass into these high value building blocks for global markets. It's efficient, it's thorough, it's reliable, scalable, and so biorefining is now ready for the world stage. I apologize for this slide because at the end it's going to be a little bit of an eye chart, but we start with wood chips. We go through the chocolate mousse stage in 20 seconds. We're then creating sugars right away, which we can ferment. We're getting a 4:1 ratio of C5 to C6s. We go through standard fermentation, like the kind you'd use to make beer or wine in your home, pretty much, except we're using a special yeast, but same thing, effectively. We're fermenting into fuels and chemicals. The next other 60%, I started with a ton metric, and this is 600 kilograms, is microcrystalline cellulose and lignin bound together. And then we're going off into paper, packaging, cement. So 0.1% of our microcrystalline cellulose blended into a concrete mixture, not just actually increases the tensile strength of that cement by 100%. So 0.1% of our stuff in, 100% increase in tensile strength. Incredible, yet it works. Paper and packaging, we're doing some similar things in paper and packaging where we improve the strength rather dramatically. Processed wood, you think particle board, fiber board, so I-beams and so forth that are now created using microlams. We can make them stronger and lighter. We have that low energy pathway I mentioned to nanofibrillated cellulose, which also works in paper, packaging, cement. I'm not going to talk about rheology or 3D printing, but it works there. Automobiles, I mentioned earlier, the FDA has recently approved nanocellulose because it absorbs fat in your intestines, so it helps people reduce. My friend said, wait a minute, Jack, you can eat this stuff, you can build car bodies out of it, you can use it in pharmaceuticals and actually use it in cosmetics to create, face masks and for anti-wrinkle. And he said, it sounds too good to be true. Check out the wiki. I think if you looked at the early, if there were such a thing back in the 1890s in terms of what petroleum might be able to do, people would say, sounds too good to be true. Enzymes we used we can make actually a sugar equivalent. So dextrose 95 is a product that's out there, 95% pure sugar, pure glucose. We can make that as well. So yes, it would be edible. Markets are where we're spending our time right now, which is a big part of the focus for an early stage company, especially when you've got these many markets you can play in. How do you limit your focus just to get the first plant built, which we've got now with the licensee, but now we've got to build our own. So the lignin can actually go into fuels as well, paper packaging, polymers, packaging, as I mentioned, packaging foams and composites, and then paints, coatings, and adhesives. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because I've kind of beaten it up a bit, and I want to get to a little bit of a discussion on the mistakes we've made. Well, we're 11 years into this, so obviously it took a lot longer than we thought. But disruptive technologies, it turns out, are a lot harder than we imagined. And the science, not only we had to get through the science and the engineering, which we've done, but then we also had to be able to prove to our partners that, yeah, this stuff can go into packaging and paper and cement and textiles and make those products cheaper, better, and you can replace petroleum ingredients. And that's been really the yeoman's effort for the last 2 years, is doing product development with partners. Because imagine you're sitting at 1890 with oil refining and no one had even figured out how to make gasoline from it yet. And so we've been figuring all of that out with partners. So we're working, we got a 2 year to 5 year map, which is even larger, because these things, so the first stuff I put on the last page, that's stuff we're working on now. Some of this actually we're working on now in paints and coatings, for example, but we've got lots of areas to focus on. And I think after Sweetwater goes, ideally, if we're fortunate enough to get the company public, or if the company is purchased in the next few years, some of the giant partners potentially could actually take it to these levels as well. And we've got partners that are talking about some of these today. This is what the stuff looks like. Our microcrystalline cellulose looks like that paste. When it's dried, it looks like the confectioner's sugar up on the right. And the nanocellulose looks like that gel, which is why it's kind of ideal as a coating for paper and packaging. It's got great oxygen barrier properties, the strength enhancement I mentioned, and the cement strength and so forth. And it's unusual stuff. Again, check out the wiki. I won't belabor it with all the things that the biopolymer, the lignin, goes into, but it's great stuff too, and no one's really been able to do much with it because coming out of the pulp and paper industry, it's full of sulfur and it stinks, literally. Ours doesn't. And so our sugars, which a number of folks are interested in, what can you really do with this to displace fuels? Ethanol's easy. So as long as we're making these co-products that are high value, you can also use sugar around the world. We've got a lot of them issued, 40 issued now in different parts of the world, 36 more pending, and 4 planned applications. I'll stop sharing that and jump into a different one. Back into this. So different types of startups. The spin out I mentioned already is kind of what Paytech did. In Buffalo, you've got some great spin outs. In fact, in law firms, a lot of the law firms, you've got 2 big ones right now in the personal injury space, where you had one. Private or employee inventor IP, think Apple, Microsoft, Uber, Facebook, Groupon. Really ours is the same way. Sweetwater is that. It really comes down to invention. Service, filling a void. Amazon is effectively like that, although you could argue that that was an invention as well, but it came, following the brilliance of the internet. University IP, and we're working with MIT extensively. Boeing and Intel really came out from MIT grads. Cisco and Google from Stanford. So what are the lessons we learned and the mistakes we made? I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, and maybe in 8 minutes, we'll jump to questions. Well, you need a great concept first. And we had that really with Paytech, and we believe we've got that with Sweetwater now. We raised over $50 million in friends and family with Paytech when we launched that. We've raised over $50 million in friends and family with this company too. People often ask me, how'd you raise over $50 million with 2 different companies? I'll talk about that maybe in the Q&A. You need a big idea with a clear mission and vision. You have to fill a clear void that you really fully understand by talking to customers and getting out and really shaking hands and meeting people. I guess not shaking hands right now so much, bumping elbows, I guess. High profit potential. You've got to have profitability on your mind, or surplus if you're creating a not-for-profit. It's got to be scalable to go to $1 billion, clearly, and it's got to be fundable. Toward the end of my days at Paytech, I had a number of folks approaching me on different telecom startups and other startups, and I wasn't interested because A, I wanted to help save the world a little bit, and B, I wanted a $1 billion idea, my next $1 billion idea, which Sweetwater is. It's got to be manageable, and so I had to bring my old boss back because I needed to raise a lot of capital. And so we brought part of the rest of the team as well. So the senior management team for this company, Sweetwater, are some of the major senior management team. 2 of the 3 founders in the last company are running this company and founded this company. Second, we have to find and hire truly great people. We were really fortunate at doing that back at Paytech, and we've been really fortunate here in the same way. It's got to be values first and last. You really have to have strong work ethic and a results-proven track record. We've done that in both companies. People skills, we don't want any jerks. We never did. They have to have a team track record. Leadership skills, ideally, if you're asking them into a management realm. And again, you got to fill a clear void that you understand. Incentivize those great people, make them owners. We've done that. Shares and options, we've done that in both companies extensively. Treat them like owners, so expect them to behave like owners, meaning people are accountable, they speak up, they offer their 2 cents. You can get contentious about it, but that's okay, because as long as you're talking through it, you get to better solutions when you have more minds discussing issues and problems. Make sure you've got to have solid pay and benefits along the way, and really base benefits and performance-based bonuses are critical. That was easier in the telecom realm when we had more cash flow, a little harder in a manufacturing startup with a disruptive technology. Social incentives, you have to have a great culture, great place to work. It's got to be fun. We also believe in giving back. And I'll talk about that in a second. You've got to build trust and accountability. Got to really reward great performance, great ideas and results. You have to allow mistakes, and we've made a ton of them. People hiring mistakes, I guess I'd have to point to first as being the worst mistakes. We made huge mistakes at both companies, at both actually at all three companies. So back at ACC, I mentioned some of those mistakes early, systems mistakes that were just terrible systems. We didn't make nearly as many systems mistakes at Paytech, but we made one that was a billing system that was $1.5 million mistake. We had to throw out the billing system and start it from scratch. And that was a challenging mistake because we weren't that big, and $1.5 million out the window was very painful. At Sweetwater, we've actually made more mistakes than that, more multi-million-dollar mistakes. So it's been the technology we're going to market with that really works on a global scale, or will work on a global scale, is our fourth technology. So we made 3 huge mistakes prior. And the world changed though when oil collapsed from $100 a barrel down to 20. We had $300 million contracts before that happened in Sweetwater, and those fell apart in that realm. So we had to go to a new technology, which is what we have been working on for the last 4 years. You have to demand accountability at all levels. Communication, I literally could have listed that for every single one of these things, because if you communicate well, it takes care of a lot of problems. It has to be open and regular with all your employees, customers, and partners. We have weekly employee meetings with all our employees. We did that for all 10 years I was there at Paytech. Weekly employee meetings with all employees. That means we did it at the beginning, and even after we got to 5,000 employees, we were having meetings with all the employees, and we allowed the employees to chime in. Sometimes we wrapped up at Paytech nationally. We were just US based there. But somebody would call in and they'd talk about their benefits or something on the call, and in front of all 5,000 employees or whoever dialed in. And we did that every week. I'd never been in another company that ever did that prior, and had that level of open communication. The other thing that our CEO did that I learned from him is he would share to the point of being uncomfortable. So he'd tell people everything that was going on. Partners we were working with. It only became an issue when we got to be public. That was more of a challenge because he liked to share everything from our senior team meeting. He would share with all the employees in the company. Now the employees loved it because everybody knew what was going on, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that was the kind of company I wanted to work for. And that's why I convinced him to come over to Sweetwater 8 years ago. Weekly team and one-to-one meetings, customer advisory boards. I won't talk about those because I'm running out of time. Big on social events and having fun. We're always big on having fun. Incentive programs, contests, trips. We're nuts about that kind of stuff. We try to create a give back culture, a heavy focus on philanthropy and giving back to your communities where you live in. Back when we had a lot of money, when the company was highly profitable at Paytech, our CEO had a budget line item for $10,000 per manager in the company, where they simply they could fund charitable events in their community. The requirement was they had to be involved and their teams had to be involved. So whether it was Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Habitat, Boys and Girls Clubs, Food Link, you name it. And we were involved in, I don't know how many, hundreds of different charities around the nation. Recognize contributions by individuals and teams. When you screw up, admit it. We're big on that. But then discuss progress. The 5 whys adopted from Japanese business culture. Why did this happen? Why did that happen? Trace it back to its origins. Discuss, research, and find solutions. Listen to everybody and move on. Dream big. That's, I guess, if you're trying to create $1 billion company, it's got to be a big, hairy, audacious goal. Don't be too afraid to fail. You're going to fail along the way for sure. We've done a ton of failing. I think the biggest lessons we've learned probably were from our failures. It worked out really well because we just kept going, persevered. Should have put that in as one of these. Make the big goals small if you can. We're nuts on training and testing and evaluating and helping people grow. We train in the hiring process. That was probably the biggest challenge we had and the biggest risk we had back at Paytech, we made so many hiring mistakes, from managers to frontline employees, that finally we just got fed up with our mistakes and started to become really much better at it. So we built a huge training department that was highly paid and from frontline employees. So we had people that could actually walk the walk, not just talk the talk, and not HR. No offense against HR, but they didn't know how to train salespeople to save their lives. So we brought in the top salespeople and sales managers, had to pay them a lot of money because that's what they were making in the field, and had them teach the top salespeople in the country, and then make it fun, which is what we do all the time. Madonna, I'm going to turn it over to questions now, because I don't want to, I'm down to like my last 9 minutes, and I want to make sure we have a chance for people to talk a little bit. Kishka, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome.
Great. So Jack, thank you so much. That was outstanding information, content, a lot of value that I think companies at all levels can share. And I got to say, you reap what you sow. I mean, you've done so much on so many levels, but you've also given on many levels, and you walk the walk. And I think that that is clearly evident with your successes. And we do have some questions. One of them is, can you utilize bamboo as an input source?
Great question. The answer is yes. We've done more work with eucalyptus than bamboo, but bamboo, as you know, is really a grass, grows really quickly. It's hard. It's a wonderful source of cellulose. So we've had a number of conversations about bamboo, but bamboo it's hard, and that's good for our process. We're working with some really fluffy light stuff now that we've figured out a way to densify. So it's a wide range of products we can use, from empty fruit baskets from Malaysia we've done testing with. I mean, but bamboo is excellent.
Great. And we've got a question from Thomas. Thomas, take it away.
So I have one question about just your career as a whole, and I also have one about Sweetwater. My first question is, what is your process for brainstorming ideas like? How do your best ideas come about, and where do you get your best ideas, as an example of how you get them? And also for Sweetwater, has your company reached the milestone of getting pushback from the petroleum industry yet? And if not, do you think it'll happen, and what will that look like?
Two great questions, Thomas. So let me talk about brainstorming first, and then I'll talk about the petroleum industry second. So brainstorming, there that we do with engineering solutions and chemistry solutions, and we do a lot of that internally, but we also bring in outside experts because we don't know enough. We're small. I guess that's number one. But for a lot of the work now, where we've got customers involved in product development and product work, brainstorming with teams at giant companies, which is wonderful. In fact, I'm going to have to leave at 12 noon sharp because I've got a giant company that's based in France that we're brainstorming with today, as a matter of fact. So we do a lot of brainstorming with technical teams in companies. From the petroleum industry question, we've had connection with the 3 largest petroleum companies in the world. They know about us. They're actually more interested in kind of a positive way. We're too small to really, for them to be concerned yet. And I don't know that they'll ever really be concerned. I think actually they look at us as an opportunity, because, it's going to be, petroleum is going to be with us for arguably forever, but for a long time at any rate. And I was kidding with one petroleum executive. I said, well, if you could do all the things you're doing right now, but do them sustainably, wouldn't that be cool? And he said, absolutely. He said, yeah, we'll own you guys someday. So I think that their focus is, they're such giants, and they've done so, they've gotten into some of these markets. So in some ways they've led the way for us with plastics and all the cool stuff petroleum's in, even though it's a horrible industry in a lot of ways because it's not at all sustainable. But if you can do it sustainably, it's a win for the planet and win for all of us.
Jack, I have a question. Do you have any tips for training, like maybe your founding team as you scale, and like there's new things that you have to do, and you're maybe not equipped, but you're not ready to hire?
Sure. That's, yeah, I do. I've got one big one. We've been fiends about advisory boards. So we did a lot of advisory boards, customer advisory boards, and then partner advisory boards back at Paytech. And we're in our third advisory board at Sweetwater. And these folks are working largely for free. I say largely because they are working for free, but we actually, if they do well and give us really great ideas, we typically our board typically grants warrants to them, so stock shares. But they work on our behalf, and so they give us outrageous advice, everything from marketing, PR, sales, technical advice, engineering advice, market advice, and we've got people who are top leaders in the markets in polyurethane foams. And in fact, the call I'm going to be on in 4 minutes, we've an expert who's a polymer chemist who's a genius, and he's working with this giant company in France. He's from our advisory board. So advisory boards are the way to really take advantage of outside expertise and get other people involved in your story.
Appreciate
it. Thank you, Jack.
Sure.
Okay, hopefully we've got time for one more. And I'm going to actually, it's from John Moscato. How does your process work? And high pressure, high heat? And have you heard of a local company here called Polymer Conversions? They convert organics directly into petroleum. And how are you doing?
Love an introduction, so I don't know them. But we know Aerosafe Global in Buffalo, because we met them through the Endeavor gang, and they got some potential use of our lignin actually as a biopolymer in some of their products. We'll see. But I'd love to meet them. Yes, pressure and heat. And if John, you'd like to talk about it at some length, Madonna can connect you directly with me. I'd love to have a chat with you about it. We talk about it all day, all the time. I'm just down the road too, but we can Zoom and I can walk you through a presentation and walk you through the technical details if you're interested.
Great. And thanks again, Jack. Couple quick thank yous to our Techstars and Upstate Venture Connect partners here that made all of this possible, as you did, Jack. And, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, but he also plays very nicely, plays very well with his band, Don't Know Jack. So we're going to use your band, your music, song called Evolution, to see us out. Attendees, thank you so much for being here as well. Wish you all well. Have a great weekend and best well wishes for your next meeting, Jack.